I want to write a blog post for our, well, I guess for anybody who doesn't know what Stackbit is. And so
Hmm.
what I wanted to accomplish here, and however much time it takes, might not be too long, is basically walk through the evolution of Stackbit. I thought that would be really interesting. I've gotten into a lot of conversations this year on the evolution of Jamstack, which has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and not that we're operating parallel to it, but I think there's an interesting story here as well. And there's probably a lot I don't even know. So yeah, first question. What I'm curious about is take me back to like the very early days. How did Stackbit come to be? What was the idea? What was the problem you were trying to solve?
So I think the way we started was we kind of grew with the Jamstack, right? Not necessarily just in very close conjunction with it, but Jamstack is still, modern sites that are kind of like separated. Our concept that is fairly new, and especially in the early days, it wasn't that easy to get set up. Even today, like if you're doing everything yourself and you're essentially assembling your site from scratch, it can take you quite a lot of time, right, to do it properly. And like all the webhooks have to be in place. The code needs to match the content models and connected to the CMS. So all that is fairly laborious. And plus you have like a lot of different options, right? You can take a different site generator, want to like do Hugo or Jekyll, or actually like switch to React and then do Gatsby Next.js. And you have lots of different CMSs to choose from. And people are a little bit like, what should I choose? And all these feel like big decisions, and how do I get started, etc. So we started with facilitating that thing, was like, we were there to facilitate getting your Jamstack site set up, feeling it in your hands, and being able to start to work on it immediately. So it was also very technical in some ways. You could choose to mix and match site generators and CMSs, and pick a bunch of different themes, and even kind of choose another deployment platform, and all of that was kind of, people were experimenting with that, and it was good. They could feel the difference. We saw people that were creating like the same site in multiple configurations, checking it out, learning, and etc. So that's where we started from. We wanted to make the Jamstack more accessible to everybody, and just jump over that hump of, I need to set this up and it's going to take a while, but I need to make a bunch of decisions that I don't necessarily know if they're the best ones.
What did you do specifically to help with that overwhelming feeling that people have of like, there's 100 CMSs and static site generators? What did Stackbit do specifically?
So I think we decided to just support a few of the popular ones, and essentially also look at like two different approaches of, like, for example, if we're taking CMSs. So for CMSs, there are API-based CMSs, meaning they keep all the data, they store it in their own way, and they have their own models, and the way you put data in them or grab data from them is with an API call. And there you have Contentful, which is probably like the biggest and the most like enterprisey like. Among them, you have Sanity, and you have like a bunch of others, like a very long list. And then on the other side, you also have Git-based CMSs, which are essentially, I'm going to store the files and as markdown files in GitHub, and I'm going to create like a CMS interface on top of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we offered a bunch of those, and I think we also wrote a bunch of comparisons, and we always were very happy to talk to all our customers and any questions coming in to kind of like explain the pros and cons of each approach. But I think mostly it was like the ability to really easily, and with like this solution like being free, just try it out, see what's best for you. Because like, yeah, people can tell you a lot about, benefits and pros and cons, and you have to, but like when we go, you actually like see the code and see what's happening, and see how the site reacts. This is where you experience it and see if it's a good fit.
Did you get a lot of questions of somebody's really passionate about some particular tool that you weren't supporting? Like, hey, you've got to add this thing to the stack.
Yeah, I think we've gotten a bunch of those. I think people are make their own choices, and there are lots of different choices out there. Some of them are very well suited for simple sites, and they have they're completely superior, because they give you everything you need with so less, it's so much less complexity, right? But then when you want to scale, you can't. And we always got more requests of can you support this from scratch, etc. And what we ended up doing there is we essentially supported building sites that were with themes external that were built in other languages, right? Other frameworks, for example, 11t, right? So we kind of made that happen, but did not make our themes, essentially being able to build from our themes all the different combinations. So you could grab a theme that was an 11t theme, for example, and create a site from it, right? We would support that. But what was unique about our themes in the beginning, they were engineered in such a way that you could take the same theme and end up with a Gatsby site, or end up with a Hugo site, or end up with an Next.js site from the same base theme. So I think giving people, I always believe that in UI as well, right? I come from a product management background, and whenever I'm thinking about user experience and user interfaces, I believe in experimentation, right? For things not to be irreversible, for the option of the user to make their own way in the product and go back and forth and try things out. So I think this was our main approach.
Okay. So that's, I guess, a good segue into talking about the Stackbit we know today. So for folks who know what Stackbit is today, I might call it one of the go-to visual editors, in context editors for Jamstack or decoupled sites, because there just aren't that many out there. And so can you tell me a little bit about that transition? How did that idea come up?
For sure. So I think from the very beginning, it was clear to us that getting your own Jamstack site was just the very first step, right? You get the site. Now there's a lot of customization work that you need to do. But even then, when you're done with the initial setup, now finally your site is live, and there's a lot. Now the actual work starts, right? This is where you start adding content on a regular basis, right? And blog posts and making changes and testing things out. And depending on how much business you're looking to generate from your website, you're going to try a lot of things, right? You're going to add pages. You're going to try different landing pages. You're going to change the way you're talking about your product or your products, and we're just going to have this way to communicate with people that are interested in your merchandise or your opinions, etc. So it was clear that is the moment, right, where the site is born, right, and continues to grow. And one piece that is missing and was missing and is still missing, right, from this whole modern website architecture that we call the Jamstack, is that editors, right, who are not necessarily super technical, just don't have an easy way to edit the websites. And all the setup, the way this is built, is optimized for a really fast, secure site that delivers a great experience to the end user. But this is at the expense, right, in some ways of, even the build time, right? We're going to serve it to you faster, but it's good. There's going to be a build time until we kind of take the content, pour it into the site, do the build setup, and then put it on the CDN, right? All this process, and it takes a bit longer. Now, coupled with the fact, as the editor on the site, you have to validate what you're actually pushing out there. this becomes like really tedious and problematic because most CMSs, they are just content management systems. What they care about is what is the structure of the content? What's the best way to present it? What's the best way to consume it? And it's not necessarily about editing, right? You're editing something, but all the CMSs in the Jamstack we kind of tend to forget the headless. It's a headless CMS, right? So it means it doesn't care about how the information is used and presented. And then setting up a preview is also, you have to like have your set it up, right? Have your own server to pull the data from it and look at it, etc. And like a lot of people are foregoing that. And when they're foregoing that, you are in a place that forces you to be like, okay, I'm going to edit the content. I'm going to try to look at the page separately and try to understand where everything is. And then I'm going to make a change. I don't see it. I don't know if like the color that I've selected for this button really works with the whole site, or if now the tagline that I've chosen doesn't like span like 3 lines instead of the 2 that I hoped that it will. And then I'm like, okay, I'm forced to build, right? So, okay, so now I have to wait, right? I have to wait, and I'm building. And if I don't have a preview, which often is the case, I'm actually building on production, right? And now my site is live with all these changes that I might not like, and then I'm running back, making a change, and I'm like, okay, I have a typo, and I have to wait now for all like 5, 10, and whatever, how many ever minutes until this is fixed. So it was pretty clear that this is like the next step, right? Making sure that the editor experience is not like stuck in the past, right? Where you're editing something that like is more like a form or a database or a PHP MyAdmin, right? And then waiting for the result. You want something that you edit in place, and you can see the results. Those would not be published until you're ready, and then you hit publish, right? And nothing like that really existed because this architecture is not conducive to this type of interaction, right? So we had to invent how that works. And I think this is like what was driving us, right? This is how do you make, like, a website is a collaborative effort, right, between the designers and the developers and the editors, right, which can be marketers or salespeople or product managers or CEOs of startups or whatnot. And that piece is always has a little bit of friction, because oftentimes the developer does not want to make content changes. It's not something that's really in their interest scope, right? And it just adds a lot of overhead, and those engineers are oftentimes not just working only on front end on the website, but they're building the core application and other things in the company. And then on the other side, you have let's say the marketers, whose scope is to get business and get leads into the product, and right, and eventually generate interested people and sales right down the line, and they end up being blocked, right? Not on purpose, right? But they're being just dependent on the developers, and they cannot make all the changes that they want on their own, and this leads to a lot of frustration and a lot of just like people spending a lot of time on this manual coordination instead of on their job and getting results, because speed matters in these cases. Speed and the ease of doing this. If something is really hard and you're afraid of it, right? Like, it's like, oh, now I have to go through this whole process, and talk to this developer, and then I know there'll be a back and forth, and like they'll be busy, and they'll like kind of like they're gonna like cringe their face at me, It's like it's not gonna be like great. I'm like maybe I don't make that change. It's not that important. I'll make a bunch of changes together at some point.
That's right.
And I've seen this in the past. I've worked at Facebook, I've worked at Lyft, and I've seen how this can affect the business, right? If you have empowered editors, marketers, product managers, salespeople, they can make a lot of iterations and a lot of changes, and they're experts at what they do. They drive a lot of impact to the business, right, with these small changes. And we should encourage them to just do more of this. Nobody is just like, oh, I'm going to like nail it in the first attempt, right? And so people evolve a lot of this, SEO and just generally building a brand takes a lot of content and investment over time. So you want to make sure that is something easy and enjoyable to do, and like something that you can look at the results and every person can drive their own, do their own job essentially, right? And I think there's a lot of fear, right? Of like, what happens if I break the site? As if you're an editor,
Yep.
What happens if I now, it's like I'm dealing with like, I'm not just changing a string, or I might be changing something, but it might affect something else. It's like, is this going to break? And I think on the developer side, we've also heard the same things, like, oh, is the pipeline going to break? Or is the site going to, like, am I going to get a call at 2 a.m. and the site is down and now I need to fix something, right? So this is like in the best interest of both to play to their strengths, right? And I think this is where we decided that this is what's missing, right? And we've heard, it's not just like that we've decided this on a hunch. We've conducted so many interviews with companies and with developers specifically and with marketers specifically, and we've talked to our design partners and early customers, etc. And like a lot of this came from them. I feel like I've been talking for a while. So.
No, this is great. It's great. I love all this. I want to go back to something you said a little earlier that really caught my attention, which was you had to invent how this works because it wasn't a thing that was out there. And I find that really interesting because as you were walking through those scenarios, I was like, oh, I've been there. I worked at an agency, waiting, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes for a build to build just to be able to preview what we're going to see on the live site. So yeah, curious, you had to invent how it works. So what would you say were like the biggest challenges that you had to overcome during that invention process, so to speak?
I think some of them were, how do you make sure that you make changes and they're reflected back, right, on that preview in a timely manner, right? That you're essentially forcing the site generator to be in this development mode, right, and accept data hot reloading, right, and getting it to be reflected on the site, and making sure that how do you know where everything is on the page? This is not a trivial thing of understanding where each field's content is mapped to on the page, right? So I think all of that, like figuring out where things are so you can like hover over them, click on them, and then start editing, and it will edit the right thing. And that was not trivial at all. Making sure that the running, the development mode of the site generator in such a way that it can load the data fast enough that the experience will be good was also part of it. And you want to balance that with how much work is needed from the developer to make that happen. And then also that the experience on the editor's side makes sense. So I think that piece had both like technological aspects that are really hard, and we've some of them we've patented, some of them we just like went over and are still improving to this day. So getting an experience that is very consistent and scales well as the sites grow as well, it's very important. And that was like part of the big thing. The other piece, is like, it's very important for us to keep everything not walled garden. There's no lock-in, right? We don't believe in that, right? And I think a lot of the site builders out there, right, have the proverbial like, oh, like we support developers. Like there's a box here that you can write your, little code in there, and we're going to run it at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Or like you have some customizations, but it's limited, right? And then because we're trying to pull, and like we're trying to allow the editor to do so many things, but then we have to lock down and use our own systems. And then essentially, if you stop paying the site builder, your site goes away, right? There's nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And we, coming from a very developer, based background, it was very important for us that all these things, right, all these capabilities don't come with a chain around them, right, that ties you to Stackbit. So, with Stackbit, you own the repo, you own the content. You can make any changes that you want. You can go in the code and make any changes that you want. You can stop using Stackbit at any time. Your site is still live. You can edit any way you choose, right? If you're hot on editing your markdown file directly in GitHub, then by all means, right? Some people find that more effective in some situations. Totally fine. So I think that was also like a big challenge. Like, how do we make sure that like we provide all this functionality while maintaining our core beliefs that things should be open and you should own everything and should be able to customize things beyond what we've thought about. What we're offering out of the box is customizations, but go ahead and do whatever you want.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. I was thinking it's kind of interesting. You mentioned the other site builders, how you're locked in, you got to pay for them. And if you're a developer needing to customize something, a lot of times you're doing it through their UI. And so for Stackbit, on one hand, you've got these Jamstack methodologies, you've got your personal beliefs that you want to maintain, no vendor lock-in. And I'm curious how it feels to me today, like, I guess Stackbit says we're a site builder for developers, and which is kind of a unique take. But do you think, where do you think that originated? Was it because you've aligned with the Jamstack because you were stitching these tools together earlier and developers knew who you were? Or what do you think it is about Stackbit that draws developers to it?
Yeah, I think what draws, developers are oftentimes, they care about two things, right? I think, in my opinion, right? They care a lot about doing things right? Having the right technology in place, the right setup in place. And so a lot of them are very drawn to the concepts of modern sites and the Jamstack. It's like, yes, we want to have everything, separated in its own system. CMS is all about the content. Code should be separated from the content. We'll have the web hooks in place. When a change happens, then we're going to trigger a build. I want to be able to control when that happens, how it happens exactly, where do I publish it, and what are my workflows, etc. Right. So I think like this is like one thing they care about. And I think most developers also care about providing something that is really useful to people, right? We're building because we want to build something that is going to be used, right? And so I think this is the place where you want to make sure that what you're building is something that your stakeholders, right? Those could be, marketers in your company, or they could be, if you're like a freelancer or an agency, those could be your clients. They have the ability, right, to just now work on the website. On the one hand, without ruining it, right? So you want to make sure that like this is like your work is sound and will carry them through the future and scale with them. And of course, you're going to be there to help, augment. We're always going to need more changes, etc. But you want to make sure that they can use it on their own and achieve their goals. So I think these are the two things that are really what developers want and what we're catering to. And I think, it's like people so it's their job in some ways, right, to build that in the correct way. If you're looking at it from the like the stakeholders, the editors' perspective, for them, I think they want their sites, they want to be able to edit their sites easily. They want to be able to have fast and secure sites. But that's it, right? They're not necessarily interested in like the core technology and how it's built. And because we started from a very technological place, I think developers are really keen on this specific solution, because it's like it gives them, the cutting edge tech on the one hand, and the freedom, right? Because like I think another thing we know as developers is that the world is changing, needs are changing, everything changes down the line, right? And so we know that at some point we will need to create something custom, especially if we're successful, right? It's like you start from a place where like, okay, I want something fast, I want something out of the box. I don't want to spend too much time on it, right? So I don't know that it's built correctly. It makes me feel good, right? That I know this is most developers that I know are very passionate about their craft, right? So I know that there's something there. It's like built correctly with the best practices in mind. Everything is good. And I know I'll be able to change it in the future. I think this is also like another big thing, right? I think especially developers are sensitive to this. Like, I know that I'll need to deal with a change sometime. And so I don't want to be like, oh, I'll just like kick that can down the road and know that like in a year I'll have to like overhaul the whole thing and pull it in-house, right? So I would rather, and we've had a lot of clients that are doing this, like we would rather control, the stack from the get-go, and Stackbit is allowing us this magical balance between like, boom, you got started, everything is set up correctly, your editors can work right now, you can make some customization, that's fantastic, and later down the line, everything will be supported. I won't have to migrate, I don't have to like worry about it, and I think that's why developers find it so appealing.
I love that. Okay, so yeah, that's we've talked a lot about like the phase you're in now, and there's a lot going on. A lot is changing. A lot is coming. So before we talk about what that is, I wanted to ask you to dig into a little bit of why that is. So this approach seemed revolutionary. You made all these inventions. You had developers coming. You're finding this balance between developers and marketers. Everything's great. Something's not quite right. So what happened?
I think what happened is that as the Jamstack itself matured a little bit and people starting to get more proficient in it, we started having like so many users, and we started like hearing back from all of them, right? Where I feel that this is like definitely something that we're doing pretty well, and we're pushing more and more on it, right? We always want to talk to our users. A lot of users will get an email from me, right, asking them essentially like for feedback, because this is, I think, one of the highest leverage things that we can do, right? Mm-hmm. Talk to our users and make sure that we're building something that they need. And so as this feedback came in, and we saw it through analytics and qualitative interviews and just all these channels, I think we realized that just having a huge diversity and building the site in this vast combination of technologies and playing around with it is becoming a little bit like less interesting, and people crave that guidance. People crave, it wasn't enough to let people play around and like create all these sites with different CMSs and different combinations. People want to be like, okay, like you guys are the experts, right? You've been working in the Jamstack so long. You've seen all these combinations. You've built for them. Tell us what we should do. What is the best way to set us up for success in the future? So, and I think like this is also something that had, over time, continuing to support all this like vast diversity of sites, as most developers understand, adds a lot of complexity and kind of forces you to offer the common denominator for all these different setups. And oftentimes I think this is something that prevents you from having a really high quality website, right? So one of the things that we're now doing is we're moving towards a very kind of golden path, if you will, right? It's like, this is the setup that we recommend, right? This is how all the sites will be built going forward. You don't have to make all these choices, right? So the sites going forward will be built with Next.js, right? And Tailwind, and will be based on Markdown files in GitHub as the CMS, right? And then allows you for the most portable solution ever. And you can move it to other CMSs when the time comes. And React and Tailwind being like really popular setups that you can use and are powerful. And also the way we're building our templates and themes and like the whole architecture of how things work. We're building it in a very flexible way, right? So, and this is something that came from lots of users. They are like, we want components, right? We want to be able to have components. And we used to have components, right? Every theme had its own components, but they would be disjointed. If I saw a really awesome, hero unit in one of the themes, but I actually wanted the other theme because it had everything else I needed, I couldn't make that transition, right? So now we're going towards this world where everything, right? We're offering our own component library that's really kind of robust, and you can use them in like with the components in there in any combination that you would want almost. And then you have design systems that talk about like how does your site look visually, what colors, what fonts, what is the spacing like, et cetera, et cetera. And then you essentially can create a site or a template by combining these together, right? It's like, I'm going to take the components that I need and I'm going to like apply the design system on it, and then write the content, right? And this is now I have a site or a template. And this really excites me, right? It's like this flexibility. We're giving you a bunch of things out of the box that work really well. But again, completed with like our beliefs, we're also allowing you to take any one of these components and extend them, right? And build them into your own needs, right? And if you had a hero unit that has an image, but you actually need a video there, you can extend that and create like, this can accept a media object, right? And the media object can be an image or it can be a video. And maybe I need like a whole different, I have like some unique visual features that are for my site and I'll customize it, etc. So to summarize this, like I think we're building the architecture of how sites are being built from scratch, right? We've built it from scratch in a way that is extensible, in a way that has these good content models in place. Because I don't know how many people think about this deeply. Creating the site, a lot of it relies on like how is the information architecture there, and like how is the content structured. And if you have something that is, it's not just good enough to create one option of a hero unit and just like hard code everything in there, right? What you want to accomplish is having something that is versatile, right? And has the ability to change, its arrangements and change the way that you're implementing. Like, for example, you have a hero unit. A lot of hero units have like one main call to action. So it's really easy to implement that hero unit. It's like, I'm going to have an image, a title, a subtitle, and a button. Mm-hmm. But, I think like seeing so many sites over the years and building with very mindful content model in mind, that is probably not a button. That is probably an array of buttons that happens to have one button. And then it allows you the flexibility for that component to grow and have a secondary action, for example, if you need to, etc. And so we're building that, and we're providing people with in many ways, both with the end product, but also the way it's built, right? For them to learn and understand the content model and understand how to build sites, correctly. And when I say correctly, it means like in a way that the stakeholders and the editors can actually use it in multiple different combinations to achieve their goals, right? So we're architecting this from scratch. And we're focusing much more on, one choice that we feel is very solid and really good to create a site from. We're still allowing you, right, if you really they have a different framework in mind and you want to work with that in different CMS, that is still possible, right? But out of the box, we're providing you with these tools. And then we've gotten, our UI has evolved over time. right? And we saw what people like and what they don't like. We got a lot of feedback about it. And what we ended up doing is like also incorporating that and changing the UI, right? So a lot of these things are going to be presented in a way that's friendlier and clearer, and making sure that it's what we want to achieve. And finally, I think like there are some tools that are very common that you use when you're creating a website, and I think as developers, you usually want to build things by yourself, but if they're built correctly, you're also willing to just incorporate them from scratch, right? So I think we also want to make sure that we're giving you that head start, right? Really nicely in a way that makes sense, and you can like be almost up and running, if not completely up and running, with the tools that we give you without having to, assemble your site from many other different sources and integrate that service and integrate that the other one, right? So giving you something that is good from the very beginning, and then you can build upon.
Love that. I'm just picturing myself back in the agency world, because I think just like relating to how you stepped through this process, I was thinking, well, Stackbit as it exists today with these individual themes is essentially what we were doing in the agency world, trying to slowly build up this starter kit. But for the most part, it's these fairly rigid, minimalistic components. And then we're just going to customize it based on the client or what have you. And so I'm like putting myself back in that agency world today. And I'm like, ooh, I would be licking my chops for this next iteration of Stackbit, because spending so much effort to think through all of those cases, it should all just be ready for me to go. And I think that's why I have evolved personally throughout my career. And as a developer, and early on, I wanted to build everything like you suggested. If you don't find a suitable tool, I want to build it because I know exactly what I want. And so as I progress, but also as a lot of this tooling progresses, like, well, somebody is spending a lot of time and energy, like putting all their energy into thinking through one specific problem, which is why I really like the alignment with Tailwind, for example, like the way they handle spacing. Even they're like, you don't need every single pixel. You can jump 4 pixels at a time, and it's totally fine. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. So anyways, thanks for the time. I feel like this is great. You ran through the whole thing. I've got all these crazy notes, and it's going to be, there's going to be a lot that comes out of it.
Perfect. I'm really happy, and I'm also really, really excited, right? I think you're exactly right that, like people are getting this, like, it's like giving people a boost, right? And giving them this great starter place. And yeah, it works, with companies, I think like as founders, I know how in the very beginning you're trying to build the product and you're trying to think about all these things and trying to do all this, building your team, etc. And you're like, you want a website, and it's very tempting to like just choose something that's going to be like, for now, I just want to like edit it in like a few minutes and like fine, and that's it. Like we'll deal with this later, right? And all these things like just like generate a little bit of like tech debt.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And later it needs to be paid, and then it becomes like an issue and a whole like migration. So I think like companies really want that ability to be like, I want to get started the right way and then continue. And similarly, I think we hear from agencies and freelancers how much of like a boost this gives them and helps them win deals, right? It's like we can get there really fast, right? To the client, prove to them that we have something running that is like almost there, customize it really easily, right? Without a whole bunch of development work. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? And even ongoing changes, right? It's like these things are oftentimes, I think, when you're working on especially for agencies, right? If you're working on many different projects and then now you've shipped something and it comes back to you like after a few months and like, oh, now I have to load the whole environment again and like, how do I do it,
Yeah.
etc. And even with that, we've thought about the developer. We said like, you know what, we're going to give you an integrated editor, right? That sits within the Stackbit UI. You can still use your local development if you choose to, but if you now have a small change you want to make, right? And you want to see it side by side and you want to see how it works, just have the ability to do it right now, right? And I think this is like another thing where I think developers like us because we're trying to think about all these use cases that are really, gotchas in the developer's kind of like day-to-day life that we're like, we will solve that for you, right? We'll enable for that to work. And that includes, again, being like super high level and like working with multiple clients and like needing to make changes here and there. Or if you're like building your site from scratch and you're even like just learning, this whole ecosystem, we've got a lot of folks that are really excited about that. They're like coding within Stackbit or coding on their own, just seeing the preview immediately and like, oh, this is what it does, right? And like, it enables you this like nimble way to just like see the changes and just like go forward. So I'm really excited about all of those. So thank you for highlighting that. And it's my pleasure. I can talk about this like endlessly.
It's great. All right. Thanks, Dan.